about building communities and also fixing them, which is very important, isn't it? Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Kelsey Gamble. Woo!
Gotta say, I have this curse or blessing, I don't know which one it is. Every single time I've ever spoken anywhere, I always get the immediately post-lunch slot. I don't know what that says about me. I don't know whether they're like, yeah, she's got zest, she's got pep, she can come in and wake him up again, or it's like, oh, don't worry, she's right after lunch, it'll be all right. Either way, it's lovely to be here. I'm Kelsey, as Caitlin was. Apparently, I've done everything. That's so lovely of you. But no, I've been a community manager for what feels like an illegal amount of time. I think at some point after it hits a decade, they should take you out the back and go, you've had a good run, but see you later. I saw Gamergate. I saw the proliferation of certain websites like Twitch. I saw the rise and fall of many social media empires. Love to see it. I'm not going to take up 10 minutes of my slot talking about my credentials, but just so that you know that I'm not just like a random person who walked in off the street. I started my career working for a small company called Electronics Boutique. I built their first ever community team. I literally tripped and fell into it. It sounds much more impressive than what it was. They didn't have one, and I said, hey, I live on the internet, I know this stuff, I can do it, and so they let me somehow, and here I am today. I've worked with companies like Bethesda, I've worked with the Victorian government. Now I'm at League of Geeks, and I'm a publishing producer, which essentially involves telling the community managers what to do. Thank goodness I don't have to do it day to day anymore, but I'm still kind of going around the traps, sharing my wisdom so that, as the slide says, I can finally rest in my grave. So you all know the secrets. Please let me rest. Good Lord, I'm so tired. But yeah, I love talking about communities in general, and I'm always interested. If you ever want to chat to me on Twitter, well, whatever the hell it's called these days, I'm not going to the other place. I'm going down with the ship. It's going to be fine. I've finally hit the point where I'm like, nope, nothing new for me. But yeah, come chat to me if you ever want to talk about that sort of stuff. But let's talk about my community talks in general. I like to start off by setting the scene, but I feel like the scene's pretty obvious. Like, we don't really need to talk about what games communities look like in the year 2023. I think we're all there. We know what's going on. So maybe I'll just kind of pause and go, and that's setting the scene. Yeah, sick, done. Then I'll do some community theory. I'll actually talk through, a lot of people intuitively get this stuff, and then someone like myself will go, hey, I'm a giant nerd for this shit, and I'm going to tell you about this for like an hour. And people will often be like, oh yeah, I totally knew that this whole time. And I feel like all of my talks is just that, telling people things that they already know in a way that's, I guess, perhaps interesting to them. I'm not going to elaborate on this at all whatsoever. You're just going to come with me on the journey to get there. It's going to be fun. Let's go. So this is community management. Should I elaborate? I guess. This is an old meme. I don't know if anyone's been around for this one, but it's one of my favorites. I'll never forget it. For people that don't like to look at graphs, I'll have a couple. You can just remember this meme in your heart instead. TLDR of community management in general is you want to create advocates out of your players. You want to turn them into the kind of people that are going to go and spread the good word about you, and you want to prevent detractors from existing. TLDR, if you take nothing else out from my talk, just screenshot that in your mind. But let's talk about the actual graphs, and I'll give you some actual information. This is, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the marketing funnel. This is, the community management version of the marketing funnel. It's what's called the commitment curve. It wasn't me, I didn't invent this. CMX Hub, if you're ever interested in understanding the theory behind community management in general, incredible resource. A lot of really, really intelligent people. Their whole career is based around understanding what makes people tick from a human behavior point of view and from how they gather in digital communities. They hang out there, and I take their stuff and work with it, and it's great. The idea with the commitment curve is basically over time and being immersed in a community, people's level of commitment will go up. And in turn, so will the level of actions that they're taking. So early on, there's going to be a lot of low effort actions because they're just going to be there, they're just aware. Eventually they're going to be moving up the curve, taking higher effort actions, and that's generally, in a nutshell, how community management works. But the idea is, how do you actually make that happen? And that's what this talk's about. So at the very start of it, you're sitting at aware. So maybe they've been pulled through the marketing funnel that you've created because you're a genius and you're really, really great at what you're doing. You've got a bunch of players that have seen your game or whatever it is that you're making, and they're aware. They've seen the Reddit. Maybe their mate's really engaged, but they're not really doing anything except just existing. And then right up the top, you've got that advocate, and that's the person, like I said, like the very intelligent meme suggests. That's the superfan. That's what we would say in a community, the whale, the person that you absolutely want to have, you want to keep them, you want to hold them, because they're the people that at the end of the day, when you're looking at the value of the marketing that you're going out there, word of mouth is one of the most important ones. And it's something that you can't really replicate in any other way other than building the relationships with those people. You'll notice on the bottom of that fun graph, we've got 2 D words. Disinterested, not so bad. Like, not everyone's cup of tea. Sometimes someone's gonna go, you know what, it's not for me, and that's totally fine. The one at the top, we've got lots of names for detractors, and I'm gonna leave it up to your imagination, because I don't know how much I'm allowed to swear in this, but like, detractors, I'm allowed to swear? Hell yeah. Thank God, because it was gonna happen anyway. Like, I don't know if you've seen my talks, but yeah, GDC was really awkward. I was like, oh God, I'm like real Australian here. All right. All right, so in order to actually get up that funnel, what are you doing? There's something called the engagement cycle that whenever I have a community manager on board, I'll explain this to them because I'll say, you need to do these things in order to make that funnel happen. And these things will naturally happen. It's why communities naturally form. But the idea is this cycle will happen, and it will keep happening, and it will cycle repeatedly, which makes them more committed to the community over time, because it's reinforcing all of the things as they keep going. But yeah, like I said, this does happen naturally. Let's go through it one by one, though. All right, let's talk about identity. The long and short of it is the member's identity is going to align with the identity of the community. And this is something that you're not really going to be able to control. Let's say you're a Fallout fan, you're probably going to join the Fallout community. If you're not, probably not going to join it. But when someone decides to join a new community, when they're like, I'm going to use Facebook groups because it's the most ancient version, and it's very funny to me to talk about Facebook groups. I talk about them in this talk as well. But they're going to be subconsciously, or sometimes consciously, deciding that some aspect of their personal identity is actually aligned with the collective identity of that community. So after they join, over time, the identity of that individual member, if they're going through this cycle, is going to start to conform to the identity of the community and vice versa. Becomes more deeply engaged. People will start to say we and us instead of I. They'll be, as soon as they start using those words, they'll be more likely to defend because they'll consider themselves as part of that identity of the community. They're obviously going to be more likely to participate because, again, they feel much more strongly aligned with the sense of identity. So again, a lot of this stuff, not necessarily things that you can control. You can make your memes good, I guess, but I feel like if community management was just making memes good, I would be very sad as a person. Like, just be sitting there making memes and that's it. Actually, wait a second. All right, cool, identity crisis at 2 p.m. Let's go. Nah, just kidding. All right, the second part of the engagement cycle is trust. So trust is something that it sometimes feels like a weird buzzword. The idea of trust is, yeah, you feel safe. Yes, there's that actual sense of safety trust, which is like obviously important. But this is also just trust in terms of they trust that the community know what they're talking about. If they're going to ask a question, they're going to get an answer. They trust that the leaders in the community are responsible leaders, leaders that are going to be doing fun, interesting, cool, safe, responsible stuff that aligns with their identity. So yeah, it's not just trustworthiness in like the basic sense of the word. It's legitimacy. It's often you'll hear community managers say the word genuine. It's because trust is not just, hey, I feel safe and I think that this person is not going to be a piece of shit to me. It's also, I trust that what I'm getting in, I'm also going to get out of this place. So yeah, third part is engagement and participation, which when community managers talk about their jobs and they don't have this framework, engagement is often where a community manager will go to, because this is the real part where a community manager actually can step in and do stuff. But the idea of this part of the cycle is the members taking action to participate. Now, that doesn't just mean liking or commenting. It means a whole bunch of different things. The idea of it is they're taking action to move a community forward. So consuming is a form of participation. Being the person that just lurks in groups is actually incredibly vital to the entire network of a community. You need the weird lurkers, like that's actually part of how a community exists. But as, again, they keep kind of going up the curve and they keep taking action, the engagement's going to be higher level. You know, maybe they'll start just reading everything about your game on Reddit. Good Lord. And they'll go right up to streaming your game on Twitch for hours at a time. But they got to start at the beginning. And then we've got the last part of the cycle. The idea that the member gets value from their participation and importantly, wants to experience it again. So this is the critical step. This is what makes it a cycle, obviously. You get the dopamine release in your body. You get a reward telling you that it was a good experience, makes you want to participate again, reinforces your identity, gets you going, yeah, this place is sick. It makes us trust more because we got that reinforcement, we got that reward. Now, when you think reward, you got like that fun little ribbon, you think extrinsic reward. And often a community manager will also think extrinsic, right? T-shirts and prizes and quote retweet to get this thing. Totally valid, totally important, but getting an intrinsic reward is way harder, but arguably the most valuable way. Because what intrinsic value does as a reward is it gets your sense of belonging, it gets your sense of identity, improves your reputation within the community. All of those things are going to mean that the cycle is deeper and it's lasting longer because it's doing more of that reinforcement of that identity that we're talking about. All right. So it's really interesting because communities would exist without community managers. Communities do not need managers in order to thrive. And that is basically because community management as a title only started existing 15 years ago. Before that, there were communities for sure. If you look at the old school MUDs, you know, this is way before my time, unfortunately. I start talking about it, and everybody who looks at me and goes, "Gal, you were not alive at that point. Don't be talking about that shit." But it's very important from the history of community managers because the way that they actually experienced gameplay was immersing within a community. The game itself and the experience itself was community at that point. So the mechanism of exploring the engagement cycle, even from the beginning of digital time, and even before that, even, you know, I don't live in the real world, I only do digital things, but in the real world, the way that communities form is exactly the same. Whenever I go to community management conferences that aren't specifically for games though, as an interesting aside, I'll get up on stage and I'll feel like a child. Why is she wearing a weird frog on her clothing? Why does she have tassels while she's standing up and talking about video games? But every time I go and try and talk about community management as pertains to games, everybody who is non-endemic sits up and listens. Because from the perspective of anybody that isn't in the games industry, they go, holy shit, man, like your communities are crazy. You have so many people that are so bought in, that are so passionate, that like will stand up and like wave the flag for your company. You know, we've got people right now getting up there and having full-on blood feuds about which console they like. And to a brand and a business, that's like so powerful. To me, terrifying. Really, we're at a point of capitalism that I am personally not comfortable with, but that's fine, that's for another talk. But it's really interesting to see that the way that games exist are kind of built in to create that community engagement cycle, because you've got that intrinsic and extrinsic reward that's happening even when you're playing in a multiplayer game. So one of the things that I started to see fairly early on, I'm just going to have a little coffee sip, probably maybe 3 or 4 years into being a community manager, was this huge increase in the amount of detractors that existed. Obviously, there were some political things happening at the time that then turned into more political things, and again, that's another talk. But I think for me, as a young community manager, I was kind of believing that it was about the product itself. So I worked on, it was much later than that, but I worked on the launch of Fallout 76, for example. And that was a lot of detractors. A lot of people had a lot of very strong feelings about that game. But even before then, when I was working at EB Games, games would come out or things would happen and people would just have such strong feelings. And from my perspective, I was like, okay, maybe it's just because the product is bad and there's nothing you can do about it, which is pretty depressing to think about. But a counterpoint to that is actually learning about Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle actually killed Sherlock Holmes. Does anyone know this? Does anyone? Wow. I've said this in a couple of speaking engagements, and normally the room just stares at me like, they're like, why are you talking about Sherlock Holmes, girl? Like, what are you, that's awesome. So many people just nodded, that's crazy. So they killed Sherlock Holmes, and fans lost their shit. Like, they went crazy. They were wearing black armbands in the street. I'm not even kidding. They wrote obituaries of the fictional detective in newspapers, and they all banded together, and like 20,000 of them cancelled their subscription. They were like, how dare you kill Sherlock Holmes? Obviously, they retconned that because, you know, a few things happened, but that's probably one of like the first known examples of a fandom really revolting in a very concerted way over an entertainment product. Sounds really similar and terrifying to me. I think based on that, though, I kind of went, maybe it's just a sliding scale. Like, the more people care, the more people are likely to hate. So, you know, if you have something that's really, really popular, you're going to have a percentage of those people that are going to turn it to hate. I'm pretty sure there's a Star Wars quote here, the blah, 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 love, hate, blah, feelings. I've actually since changed my mind on that. I actually got up probably 6 years ago and did a whole talk about how it's actually really great to have a detractor because it means they care, and it's something that's really important because it means that people are passionate, engaged, and that's what you want. I was wrong, very wrong, because what I think it actually was, and the way that I now operate all of my framework of thinking around, is something called an identity promise that goes unfulfilled. So identity misalignment. So this is like a fun tech bro slide. Has anyone heard of the Gartner hype cycle? We've got some more nods. Man, you guys, you're onto it. This is great. So the idea is when there's a new technology around, it's really interesting because what will happen, you'll have this like initial hype where everyone's like, oh man, this is gonna change the world. It's so sick, it's so great. And then their expectations don't align with reality. And suddenly it goes, what the fuck is this? This is crap. You go into the trough of disillusionment, which like is a sick band name, but also for me, it looks kind of familiar. And then you start to kind of get a better understanding of that technology and how it can actually work. You start to go up the slope of enlightenment, which I don't know, every time I say that phrase, it makes me laugh for some reason. It's very video game sounding for some reason. And then you kind of hit a plateau. So for me, it's really interesting to see the similarities in what happens when you have a hype online. And that hype can be literally just like meme trend cycle, someone getting milkshake duck, blah, blah, blah. But I'm more thinking about the way that fandoms operate, particularly preceding a game launch or some sort of product launch or some sort of product change, and then all of a sudden everything going crazy. So you have this initial uptick of expectation from people that are like, man, I love this game. I'm such a Fallout fan. 76 is going to be sick. I don't know why I did that voice, but it works, I guess. Someone was like, yeah, it works. Yeah, okay. But then you see identity alignment start to happen. So people's expectations don't get met. And suddenly, it's not just, I'm a bit let down by this product. It's not really what I expected. I might look at a refund. It is, this is a personal affront to who I am as a person. And that's because it's not fulfilling their identity needs. It's not just about the fact that the game that they're interested in is not as good or as cool as what they wanted it to be. It's part of who they are as a person at this point, because they've become so invested. They're part of this community. They've built up, they're at the advocate point, that they're just, the misalignment is fully becoming a shock to who they are. Then what you see is toxicity. So people calling out other people, drama posts, people like fully getting racist. It's horrible. And then what you'll also see, which is really, really damaging for a lot of communities, and I've seen a lot, is just the complete withdrawal. And I've seen it with product communities that I've been working on. I've also seen it in industry communities where you see this happen. You'll see toxicity, you'll see people clashing with each other, you'll see beef, and you'll see drama, and then all of a sudden it's like, you know what, not for me, and people just go quiet. And I'm sure we've all been in that situation. I should have hit that earlier. That's fine. You get the vibe. So I wanted to find the most random example of the identity misalignment cycle. Anybody that saw my GCAP talk in the year 2021, maybe? It was definitely, yeah, it was 2021. Would have heard me rant for 50 minutes about ants. I'm not going to do that today, but I really want to tell this story because I honestly think it's something everybody should know about. Has anybody heard of a group where we all pretend to be ants in an ant colony? I'm seeing nods. I'm seeing not as many as Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so we've got Sherlock fans in the house, but not ant fans. I'm personally offended. I just want to point out 1.8 million members. I'm going to go into that some more. Anyway, the year 2020, the world, not great, let's be real. A lot of people were turning to absurdist content online. There was already a niche that existed. I was definitely a fan. People were like just going on to Facebook posts and being ants. It was what it said on the tin. Literally nothing else. Suddenly though, it kind of took off in a really big way. There were like BuzzFeed articles. I'm pretty sure there was like a New York Times op-ed on why doing things like this were helping people cope with trauma. It's like, dude, we're just pretending to be ants. Like, come on, man. All of a sudden, though, because of all of that attention, because people were like, this is funny, we're all stuck at home, lol, ants, all of a sudden there were massive swarms. It was a true ant colony. I'm so sorry, I'm not gonna do it anymore. But they were doing raids on other shitposting groups, because I don't know if anybody else was into Facebook shitposting groups. I've never let go. It's forever. It's part of who I am as a person now. And the ants would go and raid the Marvel shitposting groups, and they'd go in and pretend to be ants, and the people in there would be like, what is happening? I just want to talk about Thanos. It was great. It was very, very funny. But suddenly, there were a lot of people with different political backgrounds, different interests entirely, all grouped together in a room with a very flimsy identity connection of ants. And so what happened was we started to see drama. People got mad about the language usage. People got mad about people getting mad about the language usage. People got mad about mods overreaching, but then also got mad about mods not doing enough. Tale as old as time. People started drifting off into side groups, which is also something we started to see happening in a lot of communities. They'd branch off and they'd do their own thing, because I'm going to go and make my own club that's way cooler and does the things that you don't let me do here. And then the racists occurred. There's it's a rough time to be on the internet, especially as a community manager for 13 years. You see some shit. Unfortunately, the ant colony was not immune to the racists, and that is a weird quote. Maybe don't tweet that, I don't know. I feel weird about it. But you start to see toxicity overwhelming, because the non-toxic contributors, the people that are like, lol, ants, are like, oh, I actually don't want to be a part of this. I'm gonna back out of the room. Not funny anymore. You start to see these splinter groups forming. And that 1.8 million number, I just want to make it really clear, that's the main group. There are like 20 spin-off groups now. And the racist one is like one of those groups, but there's all sorts now, if you look it up. So I think it's very funny to talk about ants, but it really shows very starkly what happens in a community. It's why I like to talk about it, all jokes aside, because communities are increasingly being built upon a single element of the cycle, which is identity. This is the fandom. We're here because we're fans. And you're not seeing the balance of all of them. And a lot of businesses are operating being like, we can exploit the fandom, and that's how we're going to build the community. And it's for a commercial outcome at this point. You're building them for fandom's sake so you can extract value out of those people. So engagement, and I'm guilty of this. Engagement means more eyeballs for the algorithm, which means more impressions, which lead to sales conversions. And community teams are increasingly sat in marketing teams and have marketing-driven KPIs, and value extraction is at the core of how these communities are operating. And the person at the helm of making sure this cycle is happening have zero interest in making that cycle happen. All they want to do is make sure the group of ants get to 1.8 million, because that's the most important thing. And I was part of this. I did it to justify my job. Extrinsic motivation is supercharging this cycle. So yes, t-shirts, really at the smaller scale of this. What I'm thinking of is once you start to consider Web3 and NFT games, suddenly the value you're getting out of being part of that community is inherently intrinsic, because you're getting paid. If you build that community, if you're part of that community and make it as big and as supercharged and as many people involved as possible, you're going to benefit out of it in a way that's extrinsic. We're going to do what's fast. We're going to do what gets us the biggest results the quickest. Who gives a shit about trust then? Like, it doesn't make us money. At best, again, the word genuine, the word wanting people to see us as legit is probably as far as we go when it comes to building that trust, because it's not important when you're thinking about it from a business perspective. Not great. Not a great time. So looking at the cycle again, I think that I've kind of worked it out for now. Probably 10 years' time, I'll say all of this is wrong. But that's community management in a nutshell, really.